Southampton Town Board to order on this 13th day of April, 2023. Please rise if you're able and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. Sunday, would you please call the roll?
Supervisor Schneiderman?
Here.
Councilwoman McNamara?
Here.
Councilman Martell?
Present.
Councilman Cuvier?
Here.
Councilman Scavone?
Present.
All right, 3 of us are here, 2 of us are present. I guess that works. All right, so apologize for the late start here. Had some technical issues, but we're up and running at the moment. And we're going to start out with a presentation by Dr. Joyce Novak, the Executive Director of the Peconic Estuary Program. And you'll introduce your teammate there, and this will be on project updates. So Joyce, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me today. I'm joined today with Lucas Wong from Dr. Brad Peterson's lab, who's going to be talking during the presentation about some of the eelgrass work that was carried out in the program. So I have quite a few slides, so I'm going to move pretty quickly here. I know we've already been delayed. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is May 11th. We are having our biennial conference that the town board is invited to. We're focusing on our communities being prepared for climate change this year.
And Doctor, just before you actually go too far,
Yes.
Because we are broadcasting this, and there are hopefully some people who will be watching this from home, and maybe people aren't familiar with the Peconic Estuary or the Peconic Estuary Program. You know, it's a federally protected estuary, so maybe just maybe some introduction too for our audience so that they understand what it is that your organization does and why it's important, and
Absolutely.
you know, the role the town plays.
Absolutely. So the Peconic Estuary was designated an estuary of national significance in 1992 by the EPA, formally adopted in 1993 by Congress. We are one of 28 estuaries around the country that are national estuary programs. What that means is under Section 303D of the Clean Water Act, we are designated to be a community-driven, consensus-based entity so that local governments and towns and communities can drive the priorities to achieve clean water in the estuary. We do not have an enforcement capacity. That is not what we do. We work to guide funding to clean our water, create healthy habitats, and engage with communities. We very much strive for individuals, civic associations, homeowners, communities, businesses, all water users in the marine and watershed, so that includes the Peconic River environment, to have a voice. We are guided by a conservation management plan. One was first developed in 2001, and we updated that in 2020. It is a series of 35 actions, which, again, guide what we do. All of our spending is carried out with agreement of a management and policy board, and these boards are supported further by a technical advisory committee and a citizens advisory committee. You know, it stresses that our TAC and our CAC, everything we do is open to the public. Anybody can come and join those meetings and have a voice. And local governments have voting places on our committees. So the town of Southampton is the local government committee representative for the management committee at the moment. And the supervisor from Southold is the policy person on our policy board, the representative on our policy board. And those are the 2 main governing bodies that decide what projects we fund and what work we do.
And where is the Peconic Estuary?
So the Peconic Estuary is the body of water between the North and the South Fork. The watershed runs from their headwaters by Brookhaven National Lab at the head of the Peconic River. And so the boundary of the watershed is really guided by groundwater, not marine waters. So it does include streams and fresh water, including Little River, that flow into the Peconic River and ultimately into the main stem of the Peconic. An estuary itself is where the freshwater meets the saltwater. So that's why that entire area, we don't reach full salinity until about Gardner's Bay. And our easternmost delineation is a line that runs from Plum Island to Montauk Point.
Got it.
So I just want to just add to that, well, I serve as the management committee member for voting for on the Peconic Estuary Partnership, new name, just wanted to make that
Correct.
point. We brought Joyce in, and I just want to, this is an opportunity for me to publicly thank you for your work, because there's been significant changes to the partnership. It's running really well. We're required under the statute of CPF to contribute a certain amount of money to the program, which
We have the option.
but we do that. And then we do that happily, and we're one of the largest contributors to it. So just thank you, and we have a new host, it's Stony Brook University, which I really also want to acknowledge. We're working well together, and so there's a lot of promise going on, a lot of projects that we could talk about right now, but we won't, because I know you've got a time crunch as well, but I just wanted to personally thank you.
Well, thank you, Councilman Bouvier, and I will add to that 2021, the year we moved into Stony Brook University at the School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences, is also the money that all of the towns agreed to contribute money
good.
through the CPF to the program directly. Under the legislation, that those dollars can match other contributions. So we have EPA and we have state contributions. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. And I'm going to go through largely work that those funds have funded and carried out and will this year, and hopefully after that. So I'll start with the conference, which that itself is funded by local government funds. And we are excited to have our first in-person conference. Our 2021 conference was derailed by the COVID times and was held online. So this will be our first in-person conference, and we're very excited. The funds went to a mini grant program where we put out a call for all of our nonprofit partners, towns and villages, and other community-based partners to carry out projects under the theme of climate change, and our communities being prepared for that. We had 14 applicants, and we are funding 4 projects at $24,000 each. I cannot tell you who they are yet. The announcements will be made at the conference. But we are excited to finally be able to work more closely and fund some of our smaller nonprofit partners and the work that they do. One of the things we'll be rolling out this year is what we're calling an IDEAS strategy. That is inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. Access meaning both for all humans, but also access to the water in an area that is becoming increasingly more developed with private shorefront areas. We're calling it Really in the Next Generation, and it will focus on bringing areas that are underserved or underrepresented to the water to go fishing, so that those families and those children can get that experience and have a love and grow with an appreciation for water. We're doing this in partnership with DEC. We're very excited about this. We'll be running 3 sessions in 2023 to this. And we're also working in partnership with Sea Grant, looking at how to change the future of our shoreline. I think local governments know better than most the issue of hardened shorelines, the complications and legalities and codes surrounding decision-making process. And so we're working really hard to get into the communities and get into trustees and local governments to figure out if we can really dig into what are the barriers to making decisions that are better at retaining natural shorelines. So we'll have a shoreline decision work group, which is our communities, local homeowners, contractors, and we're going to work with them to identify what has been the historical barriers to being able to retain or convert bulkheads back to natural shoreline in the estuary. And we're going to be working with a shoreline adaptation initiative. This is really looking at, again, trustees and town boards, people in planning departments, people that deal with codes and zoning and permitting on a multi-jurisdictional level. We will also be engaging the DEC as part of this because they are part of this equation. And really not just identifying these barriers, but assessing what codes can be changed, how we can do that, and what policies and practices need to be overcome before we can really be at a place where we're identifying and retaining our natural shorelines. Retaining natural shorelines is extremely important, both for coastal resiliency issues and for habitat breeding issues. Horseshoe crabs in particular rely on them for breeding, and horseshoe crabs are a very important species at this juncture in the vaccine process. They're used in medical science, and so retaining areas where they breed is extremely important. The 2022 Marine Conservation and Policy Fellow, which is funded with local government funds this year, is looking at updating codes and zones at the town level, codes and zoning, at the town level that would enable permit issuers the ability to make more forward-thinking decisions if that's appropriate. And I'll caveat that with a very important piece to this conversation is proper engineering before these things are carried out, because we have seen a series of living shorelines that fail because they did not have the right engineering studies in place before they were put in. So I will caveat that with a living shoreline is not appropriate for every location. We are aware of that, but identifying where it can work and the barriers to supporting that. Nutrient reduction, which has long been a priority of this program. This program was born during the brown tide epidemic of the late 80s and early 90s. So we funded what's called Pour Water Investigation in 3 Mile Harbor. I know that's East Hampton, but we were sort of just starting out to look at some of this work. It has gained a lot of traction in the past couple of years. We're moving forward relatively cautiously with widespread PRB recommendations for several reasons. There has not been monitoring associated with the pilot projects that are in place. And one of the unintended consequences of PRBs can be a high level of iron in the water, so much so that we're working with the state and Suffolk County to figure out what those numbers are and how best to monitor what is already in the ground. So we're using some of our funds to support monitoring. We understand that our partners have trouble getting money for monitoring, so we're going to help them monitor PRBs that are already installed before we move forward with recommending PRBs as a solution. And I will caveat that with we still recommend source reduction, which is updating your septic systems and cesspools. We will be hiring a part-time outreach staff completely dedicated to nutrient reduction and assisting the county and the towns with getting more individuals to avail of the existing programs to do so. In 2022, local government funds were used to look at nutrient reduction and HABs in our priority embayments. That was $110,000 of funding from local governments. That was leveraged. We're funding it again with New York State funds. So that investment has already paid off. And we're really looking at what nutrients are promoting HABs in the Peconic Estuary and what nutrient restrictions are needed. And that is the key. What level of reduction do we need so that certain HABs don't happen? We're working with the Gobler Lab. Chris couldn't be here today, so I apologize. These are his slides. I will do my best to get through Dr. Gobler's work here. But he looked at Alexandrium in the Peconics in our priority embayments. And if you're paying attention to Southampton waters, Sag Harbor Cove is in green and Reeves Bay is in red. So Alexandrium doesn't occur in those two areas here. Dinophysis in this area also had low levels. We look here, and we have both of those bays with Cockleodinium during the 2022 period. We'll be going back and looking at this area again. Chris has indicated that they have some really good results about metrics, quantitative metrics for reduction, which is really important when we talk about monitoring. PAP is a science-driven entity. So our decisions are usually made on quantitative results, not presence absence, or this is what we think is happening. And that's why we've leaned into the Gobler Lab to do this work for us. And then I'll move on to eelgrass. PEP is going to hire a regional eelgrass expert to carry out 3 key tasks for us. relate changes in eelgrass from 2014 to 2024 based on aerial mapping that was done. PEP has funded annual surveys, but those are not quantitative. Those are simply telling us where something exists and where it doesn't. And what we really want to look at is where we've had net gains and losses on the eastern seaboard. With the aerial photography, we can compare that to other national estuary programs from Maryland to Maine, because what we're looking at is not just local drivers, it is a climate change warming, and we're quite concerned. So PEP has really stopped advocating for restoration at this point because it is not having a net gain effect, and we really need some more information before we continue to do that. So we want to identify key drivers of concern, hot spots and cold spots for eelgrass conservation and restoration in the future after we have the necessary information and tools to do that in a cost-effective manner. And we will develop a comprehensive monitoring and management strategy so that the monitoring that we use our federal funds for annually is going towards this larger regional Northeast initiative. And of course, convene a work group and stakeholders, because this is what we do. So in 2021, PEP began working regionally to this end. As you might be aware, New York State does have a Seagrass Protection Act, which calls for the state of New York to designate eelgrass management areas. They have not done so yet. Part of that, I believe, is because they don't have staff. So what we will do with this entity who will be guiding us, we'll have that entity also work closely with DEC so they can be empowered and have the tools to make these decisions, because all of our areas are experiencing similar loss. I've already talked about sort of us needing quantitative evidence before we move forward with any more restoration in the Northeast. And so we've engaged the Peterson Lab. Oh, sorry. So this money was used in the past to fund some initial work. That work was then leveraged. We received a $250,000 coastal watershed grant. Lucas Wong is here to talk about that, and I will pass it over to him to talk about the initial local government investment in eelgrass and how that was really the foundation for what we're going to do over the next 10 years.
Thank you. I'm Lucas Wong. I am part of the Peterson Lab at Stony Brook University. And like Joyce said, I'll be talking about how eelgrass restoration is changing in the face of climate change. So the eastern coast of the United States has been warming twice as fast as the global average. And this graph is just showing you how from the 1980s till today, there's a 3 degrees Celsius increase in the summer temperature on Long Island. Now that may not seem like much for us, but for eelgrass is pretty significant because they start to die at temperatures between 23 and 25 degrees Celsius. This graph is just showing you where the current eelgrass beds are located in the Peconics, and we can see that most of it is in the eastern part of the Peconic Bay, and there's very little to none in the western part of the Peconic Bay. And this line that you see here is a demarcation of those beds. So a previous grad student, Caitlin O'Toole, has done some research looking at how water temperatures in the Peconic Bay are affecting the eelgrass beds. So west of this demarcation line, the temperatures in Long Island in the Peconic Bay has been spending more than 1,000 hours over 25 degrees Celsius. And then in the eastern part of the bay, we have water temperatures that are above 25 degrees but less than 1,000 hours during the summer. So the one location we know that has eelgrass is in Bullhead Bay, which is highlighted in pink in the top left graph. In green, it shows the historic beds of where eelgrass used to be, and then in pink shows the current distribution of where those eelgrass beds are now. And as you can see, a lot of it has decreased over the last 100 years. And here in the circle is where Bullhead Bay is and where we see eelgrass actually thriving. And that could be due to groundwater seepage in that little part of the bay. So the USGS has developed a groundwater model, and this shows where groundwater could be seeping out into the Peconic Bay. One of the other professors at Stony Brook University, Henry Bokunjewicz, has flown a drone. So it's called a FLIRP. It's a forward-looking infrared camera, and it shows where possible cold water seepage could be from. In the top left image, you can see at Tyndall Point, and you can also see the arrow pointing at where Tyndall Point is. The red box shows our possible point where we would try to grow eelgrass. Another point that could have cold water seeps is over at Clam Island, which is a little farther west of Tyndall Point, and that's also a possible location. And even further west, closest to Riverhead, is over at Squirreltown Park, and that's a possible place where eelgrass could be restored. So Chris Clapp and Brad Peterson have been using this method of restoration called seeding, and we basically take reproductive shoots from current eelgrass meadows, and we harvest those and bring them back to the lab for further processing. Last year, we harvested about 26,000 reproductive shoots, and we took about 1,000 of those for this project. After collecting all the eelgrass reproductive shoots, we bring them back to the lab and remove the seed pods, which are the ones we'll keep, and any of the remaining biomass we discard because we want to try to keep the seeds as healthy as possible so we can aid in restoration process. So with those seed pods, we bring them back, or we bring them and house them at the marine station at Stony Brook University, Southampton, and we bring some to the TNC. We usually wait till the end of summer when most of the seeds mature and fall out of the pods, and then we'll sort the healthy ones out and put those into burlap sacks with sediment from the location, and then we'll anchor those bags down to the seafloor. So last year, Brad Peterson's scientific diving class helped in placing 250 bags at Squirreltown Park. And this year, in the fall, they're going to go back and see how many of those seeds actually germinated. So I just want to highlight some accomplishments. The FLIR flights verified that there's some groundwater seepage in the areas predicted by the USGS model. And we harvested about 1,000 reproductive shoots for this location at Squirreltown Park. 25,000 seeds were collected for that, and 250 burlap seed bags were deployed in that area. As well as the town of Southampton's funding has resulted in the successful award of the National Estuaries Program project to demonstrate how groundwater can be a cool water refugia for eelgrass. Thank you.
So can we ask some questions?
Yes?
I have a few. So how is eelgrass doing in like Maryland, Chesapeake Bay? Is it surviving in those locations?
I am not too familiar with that area. I'm pretty sure Brad Peterson would be able to answer the question instead of me. However, I can.
Because it's warmer there. That's kind of why I'm asking a question.
So I can speak
That's
to
probably a
that.
different species.
So, right,
Joyce,
here's the,
let's get you to the microphone.
oh, sorry.
You can come up here. Okay. That works.
So you
Yeah,
know
so
where I'm going with this.
I know where you're
right?
going with this. So eelgrass beds in Chesapeake they're actually having some success with restoration, and they're doing well. And so what this regional group, from Maryland North, not so much.
Right.
So
So-
what this regional group really wants to look at, they are the same species, but genetically, they probably differ.
Right, they've had
Um,
time to evolve to the warmer
correct.
climate where the
Correct.
temperatures have been going up faster than what is evolutionarily possible.
That's accurate. And one of the issues we face in every state is bringing seeds across state lines.
Why can't we get movement there so we can at least do a pilot program where we can test eelgrass acclimated to a warmer temperature
So
here?
So,
that's exactly what we're going to try and do with this regional group. And we will, the entity that we want to hire is through the Smithsonian and a partnership with National Park Service. So National Park Service, on their own properties, has been moving seeds and plants around forever, apparently. So what we hope to do is to use that model to bring the states on board to allow this. And again, part of the issue is that all of the states are understaffed and underfunded and have not really had the time to look at this properly. What the regional group will try and achieve is exactly that. We're going to look at genetics. We're going to cover what they call community garden projects. So using these same seeds that are successful in the Chesapeake, potentially, that's one location, and having gardens, marine habitat gardens in each of these locations and compare using what we call a marine geo-protocol for assessment and survey every year. So everybody's using the same method, everybody has the same data, and we can see if these seeds that are doing well in the Chesapeake, in fact, will also do well. I will caveat that with up in Maine, they will be a little bit different. They have a green crab problem, an invasive species that is also eating there. We don't have that yet here, but
Right.
and it's also different stressors on.
correct.
These are
In
things
some
what
areas
we
of
need to
the
know.
farther reaches of New England, there are different stressors.
So my next question is, we've been managing, and, the focus has very much been on nutrient loading, not so much on temperature. So why is our temperature increasing at twice the global average? And what is, we haven't been managing for temperature, so what are the inflows or what are the conditions that are leading to our temperature rising faster than everywhere else?
So, I think that's a much bigger question that we can have a conversation about, surely. The general international feeling on that is that it is not a locally driven issue. There was a study done through Bob Serrato at Stony Brook that actually links some of this to the Atlantic Meridional overturning current. So we're really looking at this global scale climate warming. How exactly it's affecting this region differently is yet to be determined. But the overarching opinions at this juncture are that it's not locally driven.
So I'll just add to that,
I wanna
with the Gulf
continue
Stream
after John.
drift projects and the things that came out of that as well, there's some theory that we're almost at a dead end current-wise here. So we're receiving some of the effects. The shift of the Gulf Stream has moved westward to our eastern coast. All those sorts of things that are happening that may be an issue that affects this, but there's a whole series of issues that cause that problem. But the fact is, the reality is, that's what we're experiencing. And, it's a good place for us to figure out why, but also how our local environment reacts to it. And that's critical work that Joyce is leading with the estuary program.
Do you think things like the sewage treatment facility and Riverhead, where they're dumping directly into the Peconic Bay at a significantly warmer temperature, because it's been through all the houses, and it's been heated, a lot of hot showers and things like, so the water has good temperature retention. Do you think that may be a factor, that we're putting warmer water into the bay? When I was at the legislature, we had done a study with Stony Brook, looking at the Millstone 2 nuclear power plant and their once-through cooling system that was pumping very, very warm water into the Long Island Sound, but in a position near the mouth of the Peconic system. So, but do you think it's other man-made local issues that are impacting temperature that we should be concerned with?
So, I mean, I can't accurately answer that question without seeing all of the data, but I can't discount it, right, without looking at that. So I think what we have to keep our eye on is we're seeing these connected signals to climate change. We're seeing it with the scallops. We're seeing it with the eelgrass. We're seeing it with certain species coming and going, the lobster mass exodus, right? And so potentially, is it a combination of those things? Sure. But I think focusing for things like the scallops and the eelgrass on what the solutions can be to that from a habitat management standpoint as well as reduction standpoints. And I will caveat, water quality is still a key driver of marine habitats and eelgrass in particular. That is just something that we can better control. Lucas showed a map of areas, and yes, temperature is a part of that, but increased nutrients also raise temperature, as you're touching on. So, are there combinations of those things that need to happen? Absolutely. We cannot move away from, we don't have to worry about nutrients anymore, we're only going to look at temperature because they are connected. You're right.
Should we do a better job in, I hate to bring this up, but some of the bays and harbors don't flush well, and if they were dredged a little bit deeper, and people were concerned that's going to bring bigger boats in, but it's going to bring colder water in. I know Shinnecock Bay, they are going to dredge that inlet, or maybe they just did, a little bit deeper than it had been historically, and that should help cool the temperatures there. But some of those other bays along the Peconic Estuary, might it help to increase flushing rates?
So that's an interesting question, because I think we have historically accepted that the answer is yes to that. The state is finishing up some work recently. It was funded by the Long Island Sound Study, so it's largely looking at embayments on the North Shore, but where they've run through several different types of coastal embayments and looked at projections for how much dredging would affect positively those areas. And in most cases, the positive effect is very short-lived and very localized. And so when the state is ready, they're telling me by November-ish, we'll be working with them to make sure you guys have all of that information. But I think really the short answer is that is a case-by-case basis. We're working in East Hampton to look at Napeague. They've asked us to help put some stuff together there. Will that help potentially in a localized way over a short period of time? But then the conversation might have to go to, are you willing to make the financial commitment to do that every 2 years, or on the scale that it needs to happen? And that's where I think, it becomes a bigger policy kind of conversation.
And we've seen success in those forms in different communities, different countries, where they have made that investment. But I can only think of 2 or 3 areas that we looked at where there was actual success because it was a constant exchange. And I'm sure temperature is a big part of that, but also oxidation and salinity changes and all those sorts of things which help make that happen. So it's an interesting subject, because I think what the supervisor is alluding to is something that we at the state look at for us at Bay Seawater Exchange.
Right.
And the volumes of water that are required
Right.
are huge, as you indicated, but nevertheless certainly worth looking at, particularly the way our embayment systems are so designed. We have areas where things virtually don't move, and other places where they do, man-made versus naturally occurring, all that kind of stuff. So the holistic approach, I think, is an important one. So I just, thank you for your answer. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I agree. And hydromodification, personally, as somebody who is trained as a coastal geomorphologist, I really believe that might need extensive work on each embayment, you know, a full-blown EIS, potentially, nobody likes to do that, but, you know, blanketly applying hydromodification as a solution, you're just not gonna get the right, information that you need beforehand, you
It's
know,
just
the
part
currents,
of
the
a
tidal
holistic-
forcings.
It's a temperature management strategy, right? So it's,
I'm not
and there
discounting
might
it,
be
I'm
a
just
number
cautioning.
of caloric inputs, you know, some from homes, some from, you know, the ocean not being able to flush these areas out. But we've been focused, and not wrongly, we've been focusing on nutrient loading. And I think we also need to focus on, as you know, you said oxygen and salinity, but, you know, temperature, you know, management. And if, where we can manage temperature, I mean, we know how to remove nitrogen. We have some solutions there. And we're developing new ones, but we don't have a lot of strategies for lowering temperature. So.
Right, well, I would agree with that, which is why kind of our first swipe at that, as Lucas talked about, is to look at these subaqueous groundwater discharge points, right? Because we know they're going to be colder. You know, simply putting temperature loggers in the ground is not gonna give us enough information, right, to really pinpoint. You know, the USGS work is at a very large scale, so, you know, we're kind of trying to chip that away and look there. Again, I'm not completely discounting hydromodification. I just think you have to do the background work
Well, and
to see where it will
planting,
work and where
that
it
makes
won't,
sort
as
of-
with anything.
Sort of makes sense if you're gonna plant our eelgrass to do it where it's coldest. That makes sense.
Yep.
And it also makes sense to look at eelgrass that's acclimated to warmer temperatures and plant that in the areas where eelgrass isn't growing. Now, I know there's gonna be some issues and concerns about bringing in, you know, a different variety, you know, and how that might affect the ecosystem, but that can be studied. But it would be nice to see those areas, once again, being able to provide the habitat for, you know, finfish and scallops and, you know.
I wholeheartedly agree, and that's why what we want to expend these funds on is to bring the states to agreement of that point. New York State has a Seagrass Protection Act. The DEC is obligated to think about these things. And I don't think they're opposed. I just think it takes a lot of time to sort through all the information.
So the issue on nutrient loading is, it's also a sunlight issue, as I understand it. I remember the brown tides, and what we were told, I was reading the papers, I'm not a scientist on this, but we were told that the absence of sunlight because of the brown tide was one of the key factors, if not the key factors, for the destruction of the eel beds, at least in the Sag Harbor area. They got no sunlight, let alone the dissolved oxygen and all that. But so the nutrient loading is something that municipalities can have a direct effect on. I mean, as far as our codes with
The turbidity issue,
the septic systems, which is the prime culprit in this.
Right.
I do remember being in Sag Harbor looking down in the summertime at the eel beds. The water was clear, they were flowing, you know.
Right.
And that is just not the case now.
Nope.
So, you know, there's a lot more people living around the harbors or the Peconic Bays on a year-round basis as
Right.
well.
Which is why we really want to spend funds to get a dedicated person to support the county and towns. You know, the tax issue is unfortunate and brought kind of a real slowdown to homeowners upgrading their systems. We are past that, but I think that maybe it lost momentum. So we're gonna really try and kickstart that. We're gonna identify priority areas. We're gonna send out physical mailers to summertime residents when they get here, and really have boots on the ground to try and get people to start availing of the programs that everybody worked really hard to put in place.
So not to rain on your parade, it's not quite done. You know, we still have the issue with the IRS putting a 3-year amendment.
That is correct.
For the amendment issue. So we're
Correct.
having that problem as well. We've held off, and I'm glad you're talking about that, because we've held off and going full-blown for the tax issue, because it seemed really unfair to burden people that way. So we still have a small population of people that did the right thing at the beginning, and there's still arguments with the IRS to get that done, but I agree, we're getting to the right place.
Right, moving
And
forward,
then
though,
it's
there won't be
time
a
to-
tax burden. It's only
Yeah, and I think
people
most
who made the right decision more than 3 years ago.
municipalities are, you know, willing to expand their mandates and things like that, which is certainly Southampton that was our intent, that we got hung up on the issue, the tax issue, but I appreciate you saying that, because I agree, I think that's one of the big things. And there is data, by the way, of how much heat, how much heat is contributed by human action, particularly as it comes through septic systems and into the ground. I wouldn't say it's a precise measurement, but it's an astounding number.
Right.
And I don't know what that looks like on the other side of things. It'd be interesting to see what those two sets of
Right.
data actually do. But
And I'll also add to that, John, that, the issue of ocean acidification is also exacerbated by this very localized near coastal human inputs and warming and, everything that goes together with that. So, I mean, it's all things that we can try and deal with together.
yeah, and I guess I'm saying that because I think you're spot on, timing-wise and everything. I'm really glad to hear that this is something that we're finally getting to, because we've talked about this a lot over the years. So it's nice to see. So good.
Okay.
And you got one councilman's vote.
So I'm very quickly, I know we're pressed for time here, going to go through some outreach activities just to give you an idea. We've started to work with the aquarium to put in some dedicated signage, also with the Protection Committee, which is dedicated to stormwater management. As you know, all of the towns and county and DOT contribute to that entity, which PEP set up. And we're working to put additional signs in the aquarium as sort of a nice place that especially visitors and summertime residents stop on their way out to get information. We helped to run the BioBlitz on the East End, which was estuary ride. We continued to man the Squires Pond Horseshoe Crab site. Of course, this is led by Matt Sclafani at Cornell Cooperative Extension and New York State DEC, but we're very proud that this is our site. And my staff loves to be out there at 2 o'clock in the morning with the horseshoe crabs, as you can see. We continue our homeowner rewards program, is in its 8th year, where homeowners can get $500 reimbursed for installing rain gardens and native plants. We are working with the county also in their pollinator garden initiative. Our online resource does highlight, our plant list highlight which are pollinators, what species they pollinate for. And so it's kind of a ready-to-go online database of plants for people. Again, I just talked about septic outreach. We will be dragging the county and relevant town people who deal with this to these meetings so that they can promote what you are doing as well. We did our beach cleanup this year at the National Coastal Cleanup at Mashut in Southampton. And we co-ran the Community Science Long Island webinar series over a 6-week time period. And presented ospreys and eagles on the East End. And just a recap of infrastructure funds that are coming through the National Estuary Program to Southampton directly. Initially, we put $100,000 for Riverside redevelopment. We're finalizing a 5-year plan, which will see up to $250,000 added to this once we get past the, this is for a concept plan. The next stage will be a full engineering and permitting phase. And so we're earmarking money for that so that these infrastructure funds can have that project sort of ready to go for larger implementation funding, which of course is always more money. We will be rolling out the Blue Carbon East project, $600,000 over 2 years. This is looking at an area around Sag Harbor, Havens Beach, and Shelter Island. It will be looking at It will be really looking to replicate what was done in Shinnecock with the SHRP project. We've engaged the same team to do this, so we will be looking at shellfish and marine habitats for both coastal resiliency and carbon reduction. We're very excited about this. The first 2 years will really be, again, this very important site assessment, ground truthing that needs to be done on existing conditions. We don't want to put oyster beds where oysters don't want to be. We don't want to plant grasses where they don't want to be. And so using the first 2 years to do some test plots and some site assessments to really formulate what that looks like. Our plan is to leverage the $600,000 investment with future state and private funding in the area. So we're committed to this site with the team at Stony Brook for a 10-year time period. So this will remain on our work plans for 10 years. And it will be a series of shellfish, marine habitats, public outreach, really looking to get an ocean acidification monitoring station in there from NOAA. I continually push for that. We have a very big older sister to the north of us who has 3 NOAA stations in Long Island Sound, but I will not stop trying to get them to do that in the Peconics, and that's where we would like it to go. Does anybody have any questions about the infrastructure funding plans?
Just that the Blue Carbon East has a number of municipalities in the area that you described, right? 3 towns, a village. So
Correct.
certainly look forward to coordinating with them. And this board has been contributing monies for the past 4 years to the water testing in Sag Harbor Cove, which I know this is part of this as well.
Yeah, this is
So-
part of this. And we're working with the team to get ready for a launch where we'll bring in all of the towns and villages and let everybody know what we're doing and get stakeholders together for biannual meetings and reportings out. We're just not quite there yet. Federal funds are slow to hit the ground, as I'm sure you can all appreciate. So we're really just getting them rolling now, even though they were approved a year and a half ago. But we're getting there. Okay, and so I'm going to pause here and see if anybody has any questions. I'm just going to review the funding and what 2023 we will be looking to ask for based on the 3-year buy-in plan. From the town of Southampton, the original plan to match the $700,000 was $413,700. And so really what that looks like, I've gone into detail about most of this, but I will talk a little bit more about program office costs, which are partial salaries for 4 staff members continuing to fund the MCP Fellowship, the Marine Conservation and Policy Fellowship, general supplies. We will be developing with the Geospatial Center what we're calling a water quality app and database. One of the things that all towns and villages and community groups struggle with is there is so much water quality data out there. They're not sure who's taking the data, what it's for, what it's good for, does it have quality assurance, plans attached to it, can I use it, what can I use it for? So we've already built a database at the Geospatial Center to house this data, and we're going to be working with all our partners to now bring in this data and make it very easily accessible on either a laptop or phone app, where if you have questions about open and closed water bodies, pathogens, nutrients, and any details about that data, it will be one-stop shopping. The Gobler Lab did start to do something like this a couple of years ago, but for funding, it didn't get as far as they wanted. So we're going to pick up that ball and see it to its end. We have long wanted to get everybody's data in one place so we can assess, again, what we can use, what we can't use for each purpose. As a federal program, we require what we call quality assurance plans for data. That means we have to review how it was taken, the methods, and see what we can use it. There are a lot of citizen science programs out there, like the Blue Water Task Force. We can't always use that data because they don't follow our process. That doesn't mean that you should discount it. It just means we're figuring out if we can incorporate that kind of data as well. And so that's something I'm really excited about. Southampton funds will be contributed to federal funds for another round of mini grants. We're going to be focusing on clean water for our communities. One of the Peconic community fishing sites. Through this funding, we will be putting an additional eel pass at the Peconic River. So eels that don't go to the Little River but want to get up to the main stem of the Peconics have a very small wall that they cannot get over. So we're going to be working with CTUC to put that in. And $85,000 for this larger eelgrass protection strategy that I discussed, working with the Smithsonian, and they in turn will partner with the National Park Service. So that's just a review of what's on deck for approval in 2023.
So one thing, I've spoken with our planning department, where this data may be relevant, particularly at those points where they're reviewing applications and how that might have impact within the town of Southampton. It's important that they get up to speed on that. We'd want to house that on our website as well, or find some way to link to it so that both planning board members, but as well as applicants, can avail themselves of the data if and when it's necessary to do so. But they should be aware of some of the implications of some of the applications that come down, and what it might have, and how that data might affect their decision-making process if and when that might
You mean the
come
water
up.
quality data or
Yeah,
all of it?
all of it, potentially. That's how we have to segregate it. I'm not quite sure how to do that. Some may be valuable. It depends on the parcel and
Right.
location.
Well, our hope is that the water quality data, I mean, everything we
That
do
would be, I
is
think, yeah.
open source. So however the town can link to that, the best way to do that, we can work with the town to do that. 2 years ago, we purchased at the Geospatial Center a very large, I call it a server, the man who runs the institute tells me it's not technically a server, a cloud with an enormous amount of space that we can store this data and allow people to access it.
Okay.
So that, of course, will be made available to the towns. Any of the eelgrass work, we will have meetings. We will reach out to the towns and the departments who wants to be involved in those meetings. And any outputs, anything PEP does is public. So however the town can be linked in the same way we gave the town the GIS files for the critical land protection strategy that has all the marsh migration information, right? We share everything at the town level.
Yeah, I'm just thinking in terms of jargon and recognizability of, what that data really means to someone if they're looking at that, so that it doesn't get shied over, that that it has it makes some kind of sense, or the jargon is recognizable.
But that's what we're trying to do, figure out the best way to communicate, what has a methodology that's accredited, what is, how you can use this. Taking out the back end will be very technical, the forward face will not. It's going to be
Yeah.
meant to be very user-friendly to make decisions relatively easily with it.
All right, so we're available to do that. We'll certainly make that happen. All right, thanks, Joyce.
Okay.
So on the numbers, I'm not sure, is there an ask there? Or is that, what is that? Those are some of the expenses for 2023? We've already provided funding for 23, right?
For 22.
Oh,
So
for 22.
that first year was heavily delayed with everybody because we were new and we were figuring many things out. And so we're kind of in this little bit of a delay. And I'm working with the towns to get through that. But so we're at the 2023 point now.
And our money has to be matched 50%, is that correct? Or one to one?
So I think it's 1-to-1.
Right, 1-to-1.
And so that's why this was set
Right,
up
we're
to
50%.
match the 2021 federal contribution, which is $700,000. Technically, it can also match state funds, but we're just working with federal funds at the moment because
So what is the town ask, what is the ask of the town?
in 2023, it's $413,700, and that is based on this chart that we all discussed. Don't you remember that discussion from 3 years ago that we had?
Yes.
But that
The
means,
incremental-
does that mean you're getting
Yes.
413 from other sources?
No, it means that the way the towns were broken up was based on the percentage of CPF funds, right? So whatever the total was in 2020, these numbers are based on. It
Yeah.
was, a percentage was applied to the 700,000 based on the percentage of the total of 2021, 2020.
Up to the allowable percentage.
Right, that we cut off at
And so we don't really know
700,000.
what that is in 2023. I mean, we know up to now.
So right, well, so I didn't change it.
Yeah,
This is the
that's
same
your
percentage
point.
from 2020.
Yeah.
It's not updated every year
Right,
because
but
this is the 3 years that,
The numbers
it's
change.
easier, right, to do it in 3-year, multi-year bundles.
It's just
It-
the loss has there's a formula in the law. There's like 20% of the CPF revenue go to water quality, and of that,
10% can go to
10%
people.
of the 20%
Correct.
can go toward Peconic Estuary Program, but it has to be matched.
Correct. And all
One
of
to
these
one-
dollars
one
are
for one.
matched,
They're all matched.
1-for-1, by
So
the
we
federal
ha-
funds.
So when we talk about the 2023 number would
Mm-hmm.
probably be based on 2022 reconciled numbers.
So, again, we didn't, the original discussion about this at the East End Supervisors and Mayors Association meeting was to stay at the 2020 and just expand that percentage for 3 years, rather than redo it every year based on the
No,
previous
but
year.
we have to follow whatever the law is.
But the law
So
allows, as
2020
long as
was
the
a better
dollars,
year than
match.
2021.
right.
In 2022, well, I forget, one of those years it dropped down. I think 2022, it dropped down. And I think it may have been because of the county computer-ish hack or something like that toward the end of 2022, and they couldn't close deals. So there was a drop in but I don't know if we're legally allowed to use 2021 numbers or 2020 numbers.
So the original thought was that as long as the dollars are matched and you're not exceeding that 10% of 20%,
Yes.
which we're well below
And we're
that
not-
level.
Yeah, no, exactly, that's fine, as long as we're not exceeding that level.
Correct.
Yeah.
No, I'm aware of that, and we have consistently remained well
As a matter of
below
fact,
that
we're
level.
probably beneath it.
If we were to ask for the full 10% of the 20%, I wouldn't have the match dollars for it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I couldn't
So if
take
we,
that from you.
if we took in 90 million, so let's say, I'd say 18 million is the 20% for water quality, and 10% would be 1.8 million, yeah, so you're well
We're
below that.
well, it's
Yep.
not even a factor.
Yeah.
Where it is a factor is, as long as we don't bump up against our water quality, our recurring projects that we have, and it's nowhere near that number. So I thought you were gonna be actually talking about this at your next meeting with us.
I know, I just kind of kept going because I was here.
Yeah,
If you
because
want me to
I
come
would
back
have liked to
next
have
week, we can-
Jackie Fenlon, our CPF director, here
Yeah,
for that.
I can come back.
But, yeah, I can assure the board, we're nowhere
We're
close to
fine.
Right.
that
So
number,
that's,
so.
yeah, that's fine, can I ask you, because I'm really happy that you're working closely with Dr. Goldberg. I'm a big fan, I think he does great work. A year ago, he did a presentation on Shinnecock Bay, and it was really full of good news, honestly. It was like, I can't even remember how many years without brown tide. Some really positive results. The clam beds were like coming back, and enormous growth in, the hard clam population. And I'm glad we're able to fund the Peconic Estuary Program. I want to hear some positive news. So if there is any, is some things working? Is there anything positive out there?
So I think the biggest positive factor, which I haven't really talked about today, unfortunately, I was focused on the work that Chris did and Brad and Lucas have done, is the aquatic connectivity projects. Completing the fish pass at Woodhull Dam was one of the most difficult and complicated feats, I think, of intergovernmental relationships and agreements and funding. And this year, as we watched the fish figure out how to get up that fish pass, it's pretty satisfying. We've been sadly delayed with having an official launch, trying to get a date that accommodates everybody. But I can't express how much of good news that is.
Okay.
And how the alewife populations coming back, we are tagging them this year, we're tagging them in greater numbers, we're using our federal funds to officially support, this started out as a real grassroots, let's bring some students and count fish on a camera that somebody taped to the side of the wall, to this really fundamental project. I'm working with Fish and Wildlife to get full support for the next site, which is the last barrier in the entire Peconic system. We are working with Baykeeper and the town on Alewife Creek and helping move that forward. And there's been great strides both from community input, from scientific work, and from local buy-in and governmental support at every single level for those projects. So, I
Well,
sit
that's
in my
good.
office
I don't want to
and
give the
can
wrong impression
look at
either.
that.
Like, sometimes you just got to try and
Right.
until you figure it out. And we're watching the collapse of our eelgrass population
Right.
and our scallop population. And
Right.
just because we haven't reversed that trend doesn't mean we should stop trying, right? Until we
Well,
find the
I
Well,
agree.
solution.
can I just jump
Yeah,
in,
go
because
ahead.
I think this is a big opportunity to say something. One of the benefits of the program is that it affects things that we're doing with our CPF water quality monies that are outside of the estuary. In particular, the data. We've had some issues with some of the things that we've funded where we haven't gotten the information that is important to have in order to look at the whole thing holistically. And so they've actually had an effect on how we manage our data and how that data is then offered for use. So I just want to thank you for that, because it makes a huge difference in what we expect from our applicants, even outside of the Peconic Estuary program. So just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is, even if there's not a lot of great news to report yet, you're modifying your strategies, you're learning what works and what doesn't work, and just like any infant trying to walk is going to fall down a few times.
Right.
But
Well, and I
We've
will
only
say,
scraped a few knees.
in the time that I've been in this job, which was May 2018, I have seen a tenfold increase at least in community involvement, in elected officials being involved in this program, of people really sitting up and taking notice, not just of this organization, but of these issues locally, and feeling much more connected to them. And I think that's really at the heart of change, right? And when I say we want to do this blue carbon project, even though the catalyst for that was really the closure of shellfish waters in North Haven, the fact that something has worked in the Shinnecock and we can now have a team of people who have already done this try and replicate it someplace else is amazing news. Because a couple of years ago we wouldn't have had that. We would have thrown up our hands and said, well, we'll look at water quality and good luck getting DEC to reopen that shellfish bed, and the same old conversation would be had, but the conversation is changing. And I think that's really important when you have these groups from small areas like North Haven who know who to reach out to, who are more informed about, what's caused these changes and are more personally impacted by that loss locally. And I don't think that was there 5 to 10 years ago at the level that it is now. You probably saw it because you're out there, you're on the ground, you're talking to people more. But from an overarching perspective, I certainly didn't see that. And I think that is changing in this huge way. And I think that's very important.
Good active group of people in the village of North Haven.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Terry Date, Mayor Fiore.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Very
everywhere,
interesting.
to your point, it's really, it's impressive to me. I've seen a huge change over the last 5, 6 years, just in attitude and knowledge that the average citizen carries with them and understands it more comprehensively and can make a contribution on that basis. So
I agree.
think it's great.
And PEP changed its name to Partnership, and that really wasn't in name only. Just about everything we do now, I won't do alone, right? I will do it with partners, because we can't be everywhere. We can't do everything. We have Baykeeper, we have North Fork and we have all these other places that we don't want to compete with, but that we want to bring together. And I think that has also been a catalyst for people coming out of their shells a little bit more to say, hey, we want to get involved.
No pun
That's
intended.
fantastic. I have a question about the numbers here, and the ask for the town of Southampton. These are based on federal matching grants, you said?
Correct.
do you-
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, it was bad pun.
Are we
Okay.
back on the docks?
Yeah.
I know. I'm
You said
asking
something
about
about
state
people coming
funding
out of
here.
their shells. And
And he got started.
Do you anticipate state grants?
So I'm positioning the organization to be ready to apply for Bond Act funding.
Okay, good.
Absolutely. And I would like to use this blue carbon project to do that. So that's why I've really had the team get the baseline data now, right? Because that is implementation funding, and that site in particular will be a climate site.
Okay.
And that will be a trigger for Bond Act money. There are other sites, of course. We're looking at Broad Cove on the Riverhead side and the Peconic Land Trust acquisition there to do some of this work. But definitely looking, as everybody should be, to access Bond Act funding, because it will come, and I'm not sure how much time we'll have, to access it, but to be ready. We will also continue to apply for, in addition to our regular federal funds, we do get access to this coastal watershed grant, which is NEP funding. They just make it competitive. We got it last year with Lucas and Brad Peterson, and we will look to do that again. The state contribution is $450,000. The assembly budget had increased it to $900,000. That did not make it into the one-house budget. Unfortunately, we are working in-house. We have a relatively new outreach and communication coordinator to completely rethink our state approach. So we will be looking for letters of support in the coming year to go to Albany with to try and skin that cat.
Okay,
I have some good
Good.
news on the funding.
there's room.
Good news on the funding front. So I chair something called the East End Economic and Environmental Institute.
Yes.
And I am soon going to present you with a $170,000 roughly check for the Peconic Estuary Program that the organization has
Partnership.
voted to the Peconic Estuary Partnership.
Partnership.
Yes, so we, the organization, which was actually established many years ago, and has some funds remaining, they're going to dispense the remaining funds, which are approximately $170,000, to your partnership. And the meeting was held, and the decision was made, and we're just liquidating the assets from different accounts so that I can write one check to your program. So-
I'm very grateful for that. I know that has been a long and arduous process. And those funds will be used in part for some microplastics work in the Peconics, which we're really excited about, and some of this larger communication strategy work to leverage those dollars. So I'm very appreciative, and thank you very much for all of your effort on that front.
Thank you.
That's great. That's good to hear. Perfect timing.
Yeah. It wasn't so easy to release that money. I mean, Fred Thiel was helpful in working with the DEC and the AG's office. And there were all kinds of conditions that had to be met to release the funds. And we got all the sign-offs,
Good.
plus the vote of the organization unanimously to release them, so.
Well, I thank you.
Yeah, I'll be happy when I sign that check and get that over with, because that has been very frustrating. But
I'm sure.
any other
So
questions?
do I need to schedule you for next week, or are we?
Well, so the only other thing I wanted to talk about briefly.
Because we're behind schedule.
I'm
I-
so
yeah.
sorry. So I can come back next week if you want Jackie to be here, because the next piece that I want to talk about is the next 3 years. I'm
Yeah,
going to
I
need
think that would be
approval.
good. I'd like to have
So,
Jackie here.
yeah,
and-
we can absolutely do that next
Okay,
time.
great,
Okay?
All right.
great.
Thank
Thanks,
you
Joy.
very much for your
Thank you,
patience
Dr.
with
Novak.
technology.
Thank you.
And everything else.
Thank you for your work. Thank you. Like upwelling maps.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to updates, and we're behind schedule, so let's keep this pretty quick.
I have none.
So I'll just, the only thing I'll mention, because Public Safety Division
Thanks, Joyce.
put out a press release encouraging the use of My Coast New York app. It helps track flooding and storm damage within the town, and we're encouraging residents to visit the mycoast.org /New York to learn more about it. And it just helps inform quick decisions in these storm events when people are able to convey flooding in their neighborhoods and areas that they observe by downloading them into this application, the My Coast NY app.
That's really good to hear, because that was one of the recommendations out of the Sandy Task Force. So I'm glad to see that's finally implemented. That's great.
All right, that's all I've got. Cindy?
Just very briefly, because we were talking about water quality, this is the time of year when everyone starts treating their lawns. And, we talk about sanitation and waste from your septic. I think people should also be aware of what's going on their lawns. And if you're not doing it yourself, please make sure that the person that you're hiring is a licensed applicator with the DEC, because not only do they put down the stuff correctly, they also are responsible for reporting everything they put down on every location, and the DEC tracks those numbers. So it's really important to use somebody who's licensed if you're not doing it yourself.
They should be licensed in the town of Southampton.
As well, yes,
yeah.
but they also must be licensed by the DEC.
By the DEC, yeah.
And they'll have triangles on their truck, and you can ask them for the registration number.
Rick, you got anything?
Yeah, so first off, the Great East End cleanup is April 22nd and 23rd. There's still time to sign up. You can go on our website and sign up there. Not too early to think of summer. June 9th is the Battle of the Bands. It is the 20th anniversary. You can sign up online by May 12th for that. It's a great event. It's down at Ponquag Beach. We've been going for years. We love to go there. It's a great event. And last but not least, I attended the Flanders Riverside Northampton Community Association meeting last night. For those who don't know, they put up all the signs entering Flanders and Riverside Northampton, the big welcome signs, the beautiful signs they put up. In November, one of them was stolen and chainsawed off in the middle of the night. They were sad because they pay for those signs themselves. The town does not do that. They have to raise the money. It's a very small and dedicated organization. It actually made it to News 4 in New York, and when Aflac, the Gap Insurance Company, saw it, a little tongue-in-cheek because they are represented by the duck, which is what you see here, they stepped forward, and last night they presented a check or a commitment for up to $7,000 to replace the sign. So that's why we have these cute little ducks here from last night. I dare anybody to push the button first, but thank you to Aflac, and thank you for Franca for all the work that they do.
That's great.
What was the date of the Battle of the Bands?
June 9th.
Gonna enter a band, yeah?
20th anniversary.
What time is that?
Starts early, starts at
Charles is gonna be
6,
tough to beat.
but-
And it's at Ponquag Beach?
Yes.
Wait, it isn't just for kids?
Oh, no,
Oh, no.
no, it's-
No?
Well, only kids can perform.
Yeah,
oh, okay. I thought it was that.
that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
It's like Charles's band can't play.
No.
Okay.
Charles, we might use you for a warm-up if you
I've been a judge for 11 years.
Oh, wow.
There you go.
All right, tell me, John, did you have anything?
Nothing at this time?
And John, you said you didn't have anything.
I'm good, yeah.
Okay. So, we do have some executive session items. We have acquisitions and litigation, confidential legal advice. So, I will make a motion to end our work session and go into executive session on those items.
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Bouvier. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned for all other purposes.